Do increases in minimum wages result in higher prices? A flawed study from Berkeley ignores key data in coming to its conclusion. In August 2024, Governor Gavin Newsom of California touted on California's website that the increase in minimum wages to $20 an hour for fast food workers did not result, as some predicted, in a decrease in jobs. In fact, statistics showed that total employment in the fast food industry increased. I wrote an article pointing out that the statistics quoted by Newsom do not differentiate between existing fast food outlets and new fast food outlets. Why is that important? It is important because any fast food outlet that has been opened since the legislation passed was already planned prior to that legislation passing. Major fast food companies can take 3 to 5 years to open a new location, and once the company has entered into a ground lease, building lease, and/or construction contract to build or open a new fast food location, the company can't simply renege and cancel those contracts midstream. I also spent considerable time searching the state of California's website to find the information on employment at existing locations versus new locations, but I was not able to find it. I wonder if that information was intentionally omitted or if they simply did not bother to collect that information. Now, a study by Michael Reich and his colleagues are not only echoing the claims of Governor Newsom, but go even further to claim that the increases in wages were not all passed on to customers, but a significant portion were absorbed by the high profit margins of the restaurants. The study says about 62% of the law's higher labor costs were shifted to customer meal prices. That, it states, suggests that restaurant profit margins absorbed a substantial share of the cost increase. The study is being widely quoted in the mainstream media as proof that increasing minimum wages does not directly translate to increases in prices at the cash register. In other words, we can force business operators to pay their employees more, but those clueless business operators will just sacrifice their profits rather than increase prices. So, the authors of the study suggest that the operators of fast food restaurants simply absorb the increased operating costs from their profits. So the franchisees, most fast food restaurants or franchise operations, are willing to reduce their own take-home pay as opposed to increasing prices to their customers. To understand the financial dynamics of a fast food restaurant, it would seem important to know how much fast food operators make in profits. According to FranchiseBusinessReview.com, our research shows that 37% of food franchise owners earn less than $50,000 per year, and just 16%, the top performers, earn more than $200,000 per year. The average annual income reported by all food and beverage operators that we surveyed is $120,000 for businesses open at least 2 years. Then it would also be important to understand how much the increase in minimum wages cost a franchise operator. According to Statusca.com, the average fast food restaurant has just over 15 employees. Prior to the increase in minimum wages, the state of California reported that the average fast food worker was making about $16.21 per hour. Let's do some math. If wages increased to from $16.21 per hour, then each additional hour of labor costs $3.79 before payroll taxes and workers' compensation insurance, both of which are based on gross pay. If you include payroll taxes and workers' compensation insurance, each additional hour of labor costs about $4.10. Assuming the 15 employees work a standard 40-hour work week, that would be 2080 hours per year. 2080 multiplied by 15 employees multiplied by $4.10 per hour equals $128,000 per year. Therefore, the owner of the average fast food restaurant who makes $120,000 a year in profit now has an additional $128,000 in costs. If 62%, as the study states, was passed on to the customers, that would mean $80,000 was passed on to customers and $48,000 was absorbed by the owner. So instead of making $120,000 a year in profit, the owner is now only making $72,000. Why would any owner accept having his or her income drop by 40%? They wouldn't, other than the owners in the poorly researched study conducted by Michael Reich and his colleagues. To determine the effect on prices from the increase in minimum wages, the study reports that to study the policy's causal effects on prices, We scraped menu prices 2 weeks before and 2 weeks after the April 1st, 2024 effective date of the policy. Let us restate that so it is perfectly clear. The researchers compared the fast food restaurant prices for 2 weeks prior to the effective date of the minimum wage increase, and for 2 weeks after the effective date of the increase. To focus on this 4-week period assumes that all price increases resulting from the increase in minimum wages occurred in that 4-week period. Prices would increase at the same time as when the minimum wages increased. However, this legislation to increase the minimum wage was passed in September 2023, 8 months prior. What about restaurants who increased their prices sooner than the 2 weeks prior to when the minimum wages took effect? If I owned a fast food restaurant, I would have started increasing the prices slowly right after the legislation passed, as opposed to waiting until the day the new minimum wages went into effect. Major franchisors are prohibited by law from setting prices, as this runs afoul of U.S. antitrust laws. However, franchisors are allowed to set maximum prices. Major fast food companies have locations across the United States. Did the pricing research in this study consider that California fast food restaurants may have been prohibited under their franchise agreements from increasing prices enough to cover the increase in costs? And remember, the research looked at prices for 2 weeks after the minimum wage laws went into effect. What happened a month, 2 months, or 3 months later? It is entirely possible that every penny of the increases in pay were recaptured by the fast food restaurants more than 2 weeks prior to when the new law went into effect, or more than 2 weeks after the new law went into effect. Logically, from a price-setting perspective, it makes a lot of sense not to time the increase in prices with the exact date of the increase in minimum wages. Another flaw in the study is that when it claims the minimum wage increase had no effect on employment, the study did not consider reductions in hours worked by employees. The study admits, we do not study effects on hours because of the unavailability of state-level data on hours worked in fast food restaurants. So, if a fast food restaurant owner cut all his or her employees' hours, we would not know. What we can calculate is that to recoup the $48,000 reduction in net profit resulting from the increase in minimum wages, the owner would need to cut less than 3 hours per week from each employee to make that net profit back up. That could be accomplished by shortening store hours or closing in-store service and only keeping the drive-through service open. The study also does not consider other cost-cutting activities the store could engage in. Even though the study claims only 62% of the increase in wages was passed on in the form of increased prices, that assumption is flawed, as discussed earlier. The study assumes the owner simply cut into his or her earnings to cover the difference. I point out in the last paragraph how the owner could recapture some of the increased costs by cutting hours, but that is not the only thing an owner could do. The owner could reduce other operating costs. I remember the time when if you ordered fries, you would get a handful of ketchup packets. Now, in some restaurants, you don't get ketchup unless you ask for it. Stores could reduce portion sizes. Some people swear a Big Mac from 30 years ago was much bigger than a Big Mac today. I know of a lady who owns a few McDonald's. She would pay for the state college tuition for any of her employees who enrolled in college. She could cancel that program. I know of another franchise operator who supports the local Little League team. Those programs may be on the blocks. For the reasons I have explained above, the conclusions of the study that not all the cost of increasing the minimum wages was passed along to the customer, and that the owner absorbed part of the increase in costs out of his restaurant profit margins, is simply not substantiated by the research performed in the study. It is glaringly obvious that these conclusions do not include critical information that would be needed to come to those conclusions. You might wonder why. I think the reason is based on the author of the study. Michael Reich was a founding member of the Union for Radical Political Economics, URP, whose purpose was to support an American version of socialism, with public ownership of production and a government-planned economy to meet social needs rather than the needs of private profit. URP is highly critical of capitalism and seeks to offer alternatives to the traditional capitalist system, largely pointing to a form of socialism. So, this study of the effects of socialism, government control over the price of labor, on a capitalist system was authored by a person whose ideal economic system is socialism, public ownership of production, and a government-planned economy. Kind of like asking the fox to study and report on the security of the chicken wire around the henhouse. It's bad enough that research academia would publish such a flawed study, but even worse that the governor of the state of California and mainstream media outlets would tout it as evidence that raising the minimum wages to $20 did not see those costs passed on to the consumer.